Alright, time to use my black paper sketchbook again. Yeah, so how about some brightly colored skull sketches to lighten up your mood today? Sounds good? Great, because I needed to try out my Polychromos pencils, and swatching them on the last page of my black paper sketchbook would be insanely boring to watch. So instead, you get to see how these art supplies interact in action. I need to practice anatomy and perspective, and just the idea of drawing skulls and darker themed stuff on black paper sounds really cool to me. Throw some vivid colors into the mix too, and I'm sold! Okay, I'm over explaining it, they're just some skull sketches. So I start with a cobalt green pencil here, and I got this really cool kind of X-ray effect. Really like how well this pencil performs on the black paper. I wasn't confident about all of them, to be honest, after my classic swatching session, but I did like the cobalt green / turquoise, so this one wasn't a surprise. Next one, a side view position, tried the cadmium yellow here to contrast the cobalt green, and gotta say, this one looks better in action than it did during my swatching, so that's great. Since I didn't erase my graphite sketch, the outlines would not be easily covered by the colored pencil, so I tried to roll with it, coloring over the outlines at first, and then I just let the graphite show, which in some lighting shows up as metallic. Moving on to a different perspective. The sketch itself is not perfect, a bit of a struggle with the perspective here, but the color choice is great. I used the middle purple pink, and it just made it better. Also looks great next to the yellow skull, as well as the next color that I'll use. Which brings me to the fourth skull sketch that wants to emulate kind of a semi-top-down view, but semi-fails in doing so. Still fun, especially thanks to the color again, which is this nice light green pencil. Kinda looks like Voldemort. But enough of the skulls for now, let's start another drawing. I was wondering what subject would be best for trying out multiple colored pencils, and so the Macaw Parrot was a no-brainer really. I wanted this second spread to feature the parrot mid-flight, scattering feathers. I needed to fit the parrot on a single page vertically, while the second page would be all about the feathers scattering in the wind and approaching the viewer. The illusion of which, of course, I would achieve by drawing increasingly bigger feathers. So the more tricky part at the start was to figure out the position of the bird in order to roughly fit a single page. So after lots of time spent looking at reference photos online, I finally decided on this pose. Basically the parrot's right wing being closer to the viewer, half covering its body from this perspective, while the bird's body language expresses either the fact that it's about to land by grabbing a tree branch, or being startled by something mid-air and about to change its original trajectory due to that. In either case, this position goes really naturally with the scattered feathers motif, while also giving me the ideal amount of space on page to execute my idea. I wanted our bird's feathers to be red, green and blue, but of course I'm choosing different shades of these colors to use for shadows and highlights as well. This is also a good test for me to see how I can layer the colored pencils on the black paper. I didn't like how some of the pencils from the red part of the color spectrum performed on this paper during my swatching session, so I wanted to make further tests. Thought it would certainly be better to judge them while in action rather than based on coloring in a few small squares on the last page of the sketchbook, and that was a good call. I'm much happier with this result. When it came to the parrot's head, I was a bit nervous to color it in with colored pencils on this paper, because it has these streaky patterns on his face, which requires precision and a really sharp point to the pencil tip in order to execute well. I was considering using a red gel pen for the fine details instead, but really wanted to stick to the pencils as much as possible for these drawings. So I sharpened my white and red pencils to the max, and kept sharpening them as needed. That way it turned out to be a much easier and more enjoyable process than I anticipated. So there you go guys, pro art tip, sharpen your pencils. Incredible amount of knowledge spread on this channel. Of course, I proceeded to use the same shade of red for the main body of the bird, including the feathers on its legs. The green and blue look super vibrant here, and I'm really happy with how they pop on this paper. There is a little bit of blending going on too. I wanted the interior parts of the wings to be covered in a bit of red and mostly green feathers, while the exterior part would be blue, staying true to the real life patterns of some of these parrots, of course. I gotta say though, much of how you see the colored pencils perform on the black paper depends on the lighting. I'm trying my best to show you the colors accurately, but I find filming my drawing sessions on black paper more challenging than on white or toned paper. There's reflection to be considered, ambient light, phone camera light, and also a bit of color and light correction during my editing phase to make it overall more pleasing for you to watch. Just an FYI in case you consider trying out this combo of art supplies too, which I still recommend, it's fun. But it's getting late in the afternoon. I need a break and I feel your attention might be slipping. So let's go for an evening walk, shall we? And we're back to our skull sketches. The fifth skull is where I really try an actual technique for perspective drawing, starting with a cube. Gotta say, it really helped a lot. I know, I'm shocked too. But anyway, an open mouth here, and I'm not referring to my own right now as I'm speaking, but to the skull. Used the mauve pencil, which I had to Google to double check my pronunciation of in English, yes. It made it as dark as expected, so it was time to see how the colors will look here when I layer them. I used my white pencil to lighten the tone, but it turned out kind of streaky and not great, so I had to go back and forth between the mauve/purple and white. And at the end here I smudged the colors with a piece of tissue paper to blend them better. And while on the topic of layering, in terms of the parrot, I wanted to create some highlights and shadows, as well as just more depth overall. It felt definitely doable on black paper too. The highlights were the easiest to create with a white pencil, unsurprisingly of course, since I already knew the white pencil and the lighter colors perform extremely well on black paper, due to my previous experience with the skulls. I used some dark phthalo green for the wings here for some shadows, as it works well with both the blue and the green. In terms of the shadows, for the main body of the bird, tried a slightly darker shade of red for some shadows that turned out kind of on the more discreet side unintentionally due to the black paper, but I actually don't mind that at all in this case. But I did struggle a bit with other areas I wanted to achieve shadow effects on. The darker colors did take a bit more layering and the shadows were a bit harder to achieve than on white paper. At least that's how I felt with this drawing. As you can see, I used some grey and some brown too for that, which I would also use normally on white paper, yes, but my point here is that the black paper felt like it needed a bit more convincing. For the bird's feet, I used two types of grey. A lighter tone, the warm grey number 2, for the foot that's closer to the viewer, and the darker one, warm grey number 5, for the other foot that's overshadowed. Next, I tried my hand with another top-down perspective of a skull. I drew another box to visualize this perspective better, trying to properly fit in my skull sketch. I colored this one in phthalo green, which is just another color that I had to Google how to pronounce, yes. And which you could also see me use for the parrot's wings earlier to add a nice kick to the green and blue feathers. Back at our parrot sketch, I alternated between my three main colors and some darker versions of them for the shadows. So for the red, I used my deep scarlet red and middle cadmium red pencils, while the green feathers were created with the light green and leaf green pencils, with the occasional phthalo green thrown into the mix, but mostly in the wing areas. The blue is used less in the case of the tail feathers again, since from this angle we mostly see the interior side of them, which I wanted to be red and green just like the interior side of the wings. When the tail feathers were done, I went over some parts of it with my white pencil again, which I'm just really happy about. It adds a lot to the drawing in terms of the highlights. Now, I did end up using a black fineliner to make really small areas more evident after they inevitably got covered in other colors, such as the talons, the lower part of the beak, and the eye. But that doesn't count, come on. I also added some accents of walnut brown for extra depth in the shadowy parts. Another transition, another skull sketch. This one was a fun angle to draw, with one of the eyes only partially visible for the viewer. I really like the color. I picked the light ultramarine and I think it just goes really well on black paper. Added some hatching at the end with the graphite pencil, and yeah, I think this one's cool. It kind of looked like a helmet until I fixed the lower part of it, but hey, I'm here to learn. Now for the bird illustration, all that was left was to color in the feathers and call it a day. I went over the quills with the white pencil to make them all more visible and realistic too, I guess. I started with the small ones and worked my way to the bigger ones, gradually adding more details as I went. The key word was yet again sharpening, since I wanted to create lots of fine lines close to each other, following along the central lines, the quills, in order to create this feathery effect. Of course, I had to draw a skull facing away from the viewer. It was another challenging angle, but it was a really good perspective practice. I added some hatching here again and colored it in with a cadmium orange pencil first, then went over it with a dark cadmium orange one. I was becoming more and more confident with drawing different angles of this subject, so this was definitely a good practice session. The first one of the three big feathers started of course with some red, followed by green and then blue at the edge, blending them into each other at the meeting points. It was a really fun process. There's just something satisfying in drawing a more detailed looking feather, I don't know. The ninth skull was just a partial one, missing the jawbone, and I colored it with this pink/rose colored pencil. For the second big feather, I wanted to have a red and blue one, and so I did just that. I colored it in red and blue. I'm running out of things to say at this point. The 10th and final skull from this spread was another top-down perspective drawing. It's fine, I guess. I colored it in with my Pompeian red colored pencil. At this point I started to feel like the spread was coming together nicely in terms of composition. And I liked the contrast between the black paper and all these colors, like I mentioned at the beginning. I made the third big feather green and blue, making sure to leave some space between the lines here and there in seemingly random spots, to emulate a more tethered look. After that, I realized I should draw some parts of bigger feathers on the corners of the page to create the illusion of even more feathers being swept away outside of our field of vision. And with that, my 2 sketchbook spreads were finished. I kept saying it throughout the video, but I really had a great time playing around with these art supplies. It was just really cool that the black paper handled the Polychromos pencils this well. And it was just so satisfying to see these concepts I had in my mind coming to life on this medium. Thanks for sticking around if you've stayed till this point. I really appreciate it. Hope you liked it, and I'll see you soon.